Hi. Um, I just wanted to say thank you first. You guys seem to really like my drunk ASMR rambling, so thanks. um, I think I'm gonna read a story or two to you guys from The Sin Eater and Other Stories by Elizabeth Frankie Rollins. So, you know, some people like page turning sounds. This is called The New Plague. The cat was a runt, small and gray, her head cocked in such a way that she reminded me of an old Spanish lady wearing a lace mantilla. I would open the back door, and wherever she was, somewhere down in the creek among broken glass and tires and plastic bags, she'd hear me and come running. She'd run across the stubby grass, her pink mouth mewing, and I couldn't help myself. I'd go back inside for a tuna and a bowl of fresh water. Chaz didn't like the cat. He always feared unknown things, dangers that lurk in his mother's warnings. Parasites on birds, rabid squirrels, germs on doorknobs, public bathrooms. He's afraid of food prepared by neighbors, public swimming pools, and of course stray dogs and cats. Besides these, the plague that we'd been reading about that had come to a neighboring town. Turns out he was right to dislike that cat, but I've always rejected that kind of blanket fear. The little crooked-headed cat ran across the lawn to me and I fed her, and when she was finished, I picked her up and held her tiny body. I felt her flimsy, bony life and got her rumble purr going, and it made me happy. She needed love and I gave it to her. It's about love, I told Chaz, the oldest reciprocal relationship on Earth. He gave me a look and said, I guess you don't count parasites. No, I told him, parasites aren't reciprocal. Chaz showed the first symptom, a swelling on his inner thigh, a fat, tender welt like a beetle wedged under his skin. They tell us the plague has over time changed drastically. This is a new strain. We won't die in 3 to 7 days, but we will die sooner than most. And until then, quarantine. The Spanish lady still comes to the yard, but the back door is now sealed against exit or entry with the thick plastic sheeting that covers the whole house. I thought she would be afraid of the huge, noisy generator that pumps air inside, but she isn't. She cases the lawn looking for me, and I can see her calling, little pink mouth opening and shutting in the silence of that monstrous roar. Since our discharge from the hospital on our journey home in the white quarantine van, we haven't spoken to anyone face to face but each other. It's no longer possible. We can use the telephone and the computer, of course, but no more lunches or dinners with friends, no work at the office, no traveling for holidays, no coffee shops or shops of any kind. You won't find us on the streets or in a drugstore or at a bar. We have already ceased, in many ways, to exist. In the quarantine van, it's air-tainted and chemical. We wore the silver suits, which stank of new plastic and made sweat pour from our armpits. Neon green plague lights on the van's roof reflected off the house as we passed and circled round and round and moved across our faces. In the hospital, they told us that we were the second house in our development to be infected. Disease was swifter in the first home, though, as we've already outlived that entire family. We received phone calls, but no one knew what to say, least of all us. We gave the update, and then they called back for a new update. Some days I would repeat myself 5 times before giving up answering the phone altogether. I left a message on the answering machine that said we don't have any news. The machine filled, and then people stopped calling, even our family members. Now we don't talk to anyone. In medieval times, we'd be long dead, covered in beetle bulges and patches of liver and blackened skin, coughing up black blood. We would be ancient in our disfigurement. In the hospital, we were as docile as doll babies. We let them jab and swab and test and console and wrap and unwrap us. Doctors asked us cheerful questions and serious questions, and we lay quiet in all that noise, that din, those lights too bright. We were stunned into submission. We went limp and weak. It was behavior antithetical to our professions, our years of training, our years of adulthood. In the care of the staff, we became children who had gotten themselves into trouble and required rescue. We let them hold in their palms everything that we were. They tell us we might not die. They tell us cures come along every day, but I don't believe that they can cure this. They merely trick it away, trick it into remission. A disease can be tricked, but in truth it's the natural trickster. It always finds its way back. No matter how far civilization progresses, the old channels remain open. We have charts that the doctors made for us, a step-by-step prognosis of the disease's path through the body. Chaz, of course, has already experienced the bubo, and it wasn't until we were in the hospital that an ulcerated flea bite on my ankle was discovered. That day, the nurse said to me, "You have a bite just above your medial malleolus." I told her I didn't know what that meant, and she sighed impatiently. "It means you're infected," she said. A series of stages is supposed to occur. A host of buboes on the groin, neck, and thighs, fever, the lungs filling, then chills, delirium, the skin rosy, continence burning into black. The house is fumigated now. Every plant dead is a testament. Chaz is angry with me, though he won't come out and say as much. He shares his dreams over carrot juice in the mornings and tells me that I am in them, always reassuring him that the snake wrapped around his chest is harmless. The murderer with a knife at his throat is a man who means well, and so on. In the study, he watches endless television. His conversation has started to reference all the shows and movies he sees. Sometimes when we eat together, he'll recite a line from a movie rather than reply to a question I've asked. We're not used to spending so much time together. It's hard to tell if we're ignoring each other on purpose or if, when you're both always at home, it's natural to pass in the hall without speaking, nodding like co-workers. Like co-workers. It's as though we're becoming characters in the blue screen, flickering in and out of snow. Occasionally, Chaz will mention what's happening with the plague out in the world, but it's begun to sound like the repetition you hear during snowstorms. The number of inches, the texture of the accumulation, repeated again and again. They describe the history of plague, where it began, the symptoms, the death toll, which is pretty high. One night, Chaz came to bed, and when I asked him what he'd been watching, he said, "They're dying like flies out there." Then he picked up a book and he started to read. Money rolls in from both of our jobs. Disability insurance and plague insurance, things we scorned but bought, as professional people tend to do. Now we've got lots of money in our account, but nothing to spend it on. Chaz told me that people without money and insurance are being treated en masse in covered stadiums, schools, government buildings. Whole towns have been quarantined, most of New Mexico and Arizona, some of Ohio. We've read the new plague web pages, taken the interactive tests online, listened to the physicians in the hospital who've dispensed theories from the plexiglass entrance into our room. The more we try to investigate, the fewer conclusions we reach. The disease has been around forever, and the global disease centers tracked it, but there's no indication that anyone expected it to come back like this, so vigorous and so rabid. There's a whole section of the prognosis we can't even decipher. In the newer texts on the subject, there's repeated mention of a visitor. It reads like this: an entity which comes to the house to the plague infected. Is it a doctor, a specialist? Is it even a person? Occasionally we'll read something that implies the visitor is a representation of the disease itself. What could that mean? When we ask doctors, they smile nervously and change the subject. One doctor tells me you can only learn so much at a time because there's only so much capacity for dread. Dread. We are dying. Is there anything more to dread? Eventually we learn that there's not much information about the visitor because everyone who's received an actual visit is dead. That's what we read finally in a cutting-edge online medical journal. There's a bunch of information about the alkaline and acidic properties of traces left behind and the flat statement that no one survives. It's bizarre, so voodoo and tea leaf, so unlike anything having to do with the hospital with its heaps of paperwork and billings and insurance referrals and sterilized needles and bottles of unpronounceable chemicals that I cannot even begin to grasp the notion. I read the older texts about the medieval plague, about the charnel houses, pest houses, death carts. There's no mention of the visitor. The visitor is new. One night I dream of the visitor. It is bent over Chaz. The hunched back is a lumpy, shiny, seeping mass. The whole body looks once human, but now pus-filled, bruised, visibly burning with illness. As I watch, it touches Chaz with a charred stump, and his skin begins to bubble, giving off a wet, boiling noise. When I wake, I'm hyperventilating. We await the visitor with dread, more dread. The charts fascinate me. They're intricate maps of our actual body scans, marked with the various episodic phases of the disease. The day they gave them to us, I marveled. They looked like something else, something artful. There's a loveliness to the color choices, the ways in which disease is slowly shaded into various organs, the cloying, definitive black lines of dying tissue. The doctors told us that if the cat had never come inside the house, we might have escaped infection. Chaz came home from work one night as I was roasting a chicken, sipping from a glass of wine. I had the jazz station on the radio. The house was clean, and I was happy. I'd let the cat in, and she had settled into Chaz's favorite chair. When she'd come to the door, her head cocked to the side like a question, I couldn't say no. I'm not like him. I don't like living by the limits of warnings, even well-meant ones. I don't want a prophylactic life. I act on whim. I'm spontaneous. That day it seemed as though the cat was meant to come in. She and I had some kind of thing, a friendship, and I believe in honoring friendships. I just forgot about the plague that day. I did. It still seemed so far-fetched. I hadn't seen the plague vans yet or read about the disease reaching our town, and I clean forgot about it. Of course, it looks like that's the night that we were infected. Now that the house is wrapped in plastic and everything we own, including our bodies, is sterilized to the nth degree, I wonder if I had to do it over, would I still let the cat in? I probably would. In fact, I worry about her terribly. She hasn't come around in days. The doctors say she's certain to be dead. Sometimes I look down at my hands and I see them turning the lock, opening the door, reaching for her tiny light body. I see them holding her, lifting her to my mouth, kissing her head, her tail curling around my arm for balance. The gestures of these hands, their movements and shape and heat, these things will be gone soon. There will be nothing left of them, no mark. This life I've lived, nothing more than a breeze, a long exhalation. Every afternoon there's a drop of food and meds and books and gifts. These are delivered just outside our front door to a self-sanitizing box. Some of the things we find in our daily drop are shocking. They're mass-producing casseroles for the sick. Each one comes with a pre-printed to and from tag with "Get Well" scrawled in fancy script across the top. Specially defined ingredients according to your disease. Outside of the boxes, there are little squares to check for plague, AIDS, cancer, sexually transmitted disease, addiction, heart disease, and so on. The plague-infected get casseroles of rice and carrot and raisin, held together by some sticky and unidentifiable brown sauce. We get cookies, too. The cookies are also ingredient-specific. Plague cookies are oatmeal raisin. We got a box of the sexually transmitted by accident once, and when we tasted them, they were sugarless lumps of dough. Your diet becomes severely restricted at the onset of the plague, so much so that they limit your online food ordering capability. One night, trying to make up with Chaz, I get my friend Nancy to drop some Chinese takeout in our box. I know she's brave enough to come, but she hesitates, wondering if it isn't bad for us. I say, Nancy, are you going to let me die without one last spring roll? I'm joking, of course, and it's the first time I realize I know nothing about expecting to die. Shouldn't something have shifted, other than an intensification of dread? I load the table with all that glorious food from Elena Wu's, and when Chaz comes in, he mock swoons just from the smell. We have spring rolls and dim sum and the sauces, 4 different main dishes, and a separate bag of fortune cookies. Nancy stuck in a note with fake Chinese writing, which she translated into Bon Appetit. I show Chaz and he laughs, and he reaches out and runs his fingers over my forearm, light and loving. It's the first night I think he might still love me, even after what I've done. The last time I sent in the food order on the computer, I also sent along an order for some craft store items. Styrofoam balls and feathers and beads and fabrics and wire and string and glue and putty, and on a whim, a deck of playing cards. I don't know what I'm going to do with it all, but I feel excited about it, and that feels like something. Every second day, we draw each other's blood into tubes for the doctors to pick up. Last time we spoke with them on the phone, we overheard a voice in the background say, Jesus, are those 2 alive still? Chaz sleeps horribly late into the day, and sometimes when I'm wandering around the house, I see him flung across the bed with his mouth open. I stop and stare, and the feelings that surge through me are too complicated to understand. His face, that mouth, oh, that familiar mouth, and then frustration at the sprawl, indifferent to all the years we're losing. Sometimes I feel like I'm going to be sick. I think of our deaths, how we will convulse and heave and writhe, blistered and violently textbook ill. 2 weeks have passed since we've come home from the hospital, and I've started a life-size version of my chart. I nail an old canvas tarp to some pine links that we've had originally bought for a compost bin, and it makes a pretty good canvas. I do the buboes in shiny red sequins glued on plastic egg cuffs. They are mounded, vaguely sexual and disturbing. The arteries are pulled in indigo yarn, but most of the veins are in colored wire. Organs are various textured fabrics, satin, silk, and brocade markings of disease. I make the heart out of a red feather boa, which is a stunning touch. It looks, when a current of air hits it, like it's beating. The reinvention of one's own organs gives a sense of life lived. When I look up, Chaz is in the room. Jesus Christ, he says, staring at the bowls of paint and glue and feather bits and scraps all over the room. Though he said it in that way, something scornful and hard, sounding just like his father, makes me stand up in the midst of my stuff. What? I cross my arms over my chest. What are you doing in here? I'm making something. Why? His disbelief is palpable. Why? Why not? He raises his eyebrows sarcastically, and just then, for the first time, he looks ugly to me. Jesus Christ, we're dying. Don't you get it? We're dying right now. So? I picked up a twist of wire and I drop it, suddenly embarrassed. It's the way he talks to people he doesn't respect, that condescending tone. What's the fucking point? He continues. It's not like you're gonna finish. Are you hoping to be the first plague artist? Create an artwork of the doomed? The AIDS quilt? My mouth falls open a little, almost comically. I feel a blush burning across my cheeks. He's never spoken to me like this before. I hate him for it. Finally, I say, this is personal, asshole. Just because you're glued to the TV all day doesn't mean somebody else in this house isn't still interested in living. Oh yeah? And a look comes across his face. I know he's going to say it. And then he says it. Well, I'm not the one who let the goddamn cat in the house. He leaves the room. I don't blame him. I want him to leave. There's nothing else to say. It's a relief of sorts to have it said, to have him accuse me. But the deeper, more pitiful truth is I had pictured him coming in and being surprised, maybe amazed by my work. As if my new project, at the expense of his life, was something to celebrate. I wish I'd let the cat in by accident, but I didn't. I meant to let her in. I wanted to. I wasn't afraid, and this is what happens. I'm a foolish woman. I look at the face I've designed for my life-size chart. I've used the Queen of Spades as a model. When you hold all the queens, she's the one facing away from the others. She has a bad reputation. I touch the beading I've added to her headdress. She's treacherous, selfish, coquettish. You can see it all over her face. Chaz comes back in around 3 in the afternoon, his face stricken. I sit back on my heels. I just saw the cat, he said, in the backyard. We call the doctors. I think I'm gonna go ahead and stop now. I hope you guys enjoyed the story. I'll probably continue and finish it some other time. If you guys would like that, just let me know. Sleep well. Bye.